Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Ison Brothers at the Ison Law Firm. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And of course, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So, whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification.
Hey, that was a great intro. You did a great job.
Thanks, yeah.
Today we're going to talk about drugs, speed, things that slow you down.
The guns.
Yeah, any number of the drugs. We're going to talk about them and what happens when you test positive on a DOT and or a non-DOT drug test and what the consequence may be for your FAA medical certification.
I can't imagine it'd be good.
Do we have to relegate it just to the DOT drug test?
It's not just DOT. You could
How
be
about alcohol tests?
It could be alcohol tests. It could be a non-DOT test. You could go to your doctor. I'm so excited! I'm so excited. You could go to your doctor's office and they test you and you fail there. We've had cases of people who were drug tested at regular job site. You know, like I think one guy.
Pizza Hut.
Yeah. Let's just say Pizza Hut. So that being said, if you fail a drug test anywhere. It doesn't make any difference. It's going to come out on your MedExpress because question 18N is in November. Ask if you've ever failed a drug test in your life. Now, you got to look at that question, 18N. It's a compound question. Real complicated if you're not sitting there and studying it. And essentially what it's after is whether or not you've used an illegal substance within the past 2 years, whether or not you've been diagnosed or have a history of substance abuse or substance dependence, and then also whether or not you've ever failed a drug test in your life. So the only part of that question that has a 2-year look back is the portion where it's asking if you've used an illegal substance within the past 2 years. So it does get a little bit nuanced there.
Well, not just use, but substance abuse or use of illegal substance in the last 2 years.
Sure.
So it's not just 2 years for illegal substance use. It's also, in the last 2 years, have you had substance abuse? For that part of that question.
I disagree with your reading, sir.
Looking at it right here, man.
I'm going to pull it up.
Based on earlier things,
I'm
I'm questioning your reading capabilities.
I'm pulling
today.
You can question it all you want. You work for me.
For a short
Us.
time.
Us. Hopefully you'll work for us, Nick. Okay. Here's the question. I'm reading it verbatim. Substance dependence. We don't have to read it in unison. Substance dependence. Okay, so that's a lifetime look back. Have you ever been diagnosed with substance dependence? Or failed a drug test ever? Okay? So if you've ever failed a drug test.
That's what we're talking about specifically on this podcast, but we want to
clarify. Or substance abuse or use of illegal substance in the last 2 years.
Okay, now let's take a look at this here because punctuation matters, I think. And in this question, you have substance dependence or failed a drug test ever, semicolon.
No. Well, I understand.
What is that? What is that? It's not a smudge on my paper.
There's definitely a semicolon. But I think what they're getting at is that they want to know about substance abuse ever because that's technically could be a diagnosis, which even if you don't put it 18 in, it's going to go in 18X, other illness, disability, or surgery. So my thinking is if you've ever been diagnosed with substance abuse, it's going to get out there. But the only thing that maybe wouldn't have to be identified is illegal substance use in the past 2 years.
It seems to me that there shouldn't be a semicolon in there at that spot.
Well,
and then, or substance abuse or use of illegal substance in the last 2 years. Because then that way, to me, the way I read it, it says the last 2 years is modifying substance abuse or use of illegal substance.
Sure. Well, here's the
because
point.
of the semicolon.
Well,
it's a pathetic question.
So the point here is that you got two lawyers and a doctor.
Hello.
Sitting here trying to debate how to interpret this. Between the three of us, we got about 3 brain cells. Say that right. 3 brain cells. And we can't even swizzle those together and get a competent reading. So
Two English majors,
yeah. So the
two
point is,
lawyers,
it's tough. The two of the same.
all the different personalities that go along with it.
Yeah. So all that being said, I guess while we're on that, the question is illegal substance, and might as well go ahead and reference this while we have this pulled up, if you will. What is an illegal substance? Technically, marijuana, as they say down south, essentially identify that still as a federally illegal substance. And we're working with the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, it may be in your little crook of the world, it may be perfectly legal. Everybody hits the ganj every night. But the FAA is still going to consider that illegal. Now, is ganj, that's slang for marijuana, right? I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know the street.
We'll run with
I
it.
don't know the street.
This
lingo.
guy over here looks like he knows the street
Oh,
slang for it.
yeah. What's up?
It's like the Van Buren board.
Even if you have
Yeah, right.
a medical marijuana card, that's still considered.
you're tacking on the that's like if you were you're tacking on the sentencing what is that in criminal law?
The disposition seat.
I don't know. Whatever. You're tacking it on at that point.
It's not good.
It's not good because not only now do you have a documented history of using marijuana such that you have the medical marijuana card.
There's an
There's
underlying
an
condition.
underlying condition to get there. It's so bad that I had to get a medical marijuana card. Now, I will say, before you call freaking out, most of those medical marijuana evaluations, I think, are a bit bogus. Oh yeah, it looks like he's got a a problem with his leg, and I'm talking to him virtually. Well, how do you really know that? So those can maybe be more thoroughly vetted, the underlying conditions.
But that's neither here nor there,
Neither there nor here.
or up and down. What are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about what happens if you do have a history of a positive drug test. So let me just kind of give you a landscape, okay? May I give you? Will you allow that?
I love
So
this
paint
courtesy.
a happy little picture.
Yeah. So painting a picture here, you've got non-DOT drug tests and DOT drug tests. Doesn't make any difference per se as to your medical certificate, and I'll get into that in a second. But just to lay the groundwork, a DOT drug test only tests for 5 metabolites, right? So it's looking for certain items. It's not like a regular 10-panel drug test. It's a 5-panel drug test. And so on a 5-panel drug test, the reason it's a DOT drug test is because the DOT is wanting to assess for marijuana, cocaine, opiates, amphetamines, and phencyclidine.
Well, I'm not just trying to bust your chops here
Amphetamines.
every time. Yeah, it's amphetamines and methamphetamines.
Yeah, sure.
So
Well, you busted my chops anyway. So
opium and codeine derivatives.
Derivatives. Good Lord, people.
Yeah. Derivatives of the opiates.
yeah.
So, I mean,
So let's just be clear. It's cocaine, amphetamines, opioids, THC, marijuana.
yeah, I think you kind of get that. I mean,
The big 5.
if you just go on the Federal
call-
Motor Carrier Safety Administration website and type in what substances are tested, it'll tell you
Yeah. Opioids.
exactly what we're telling you.
Yeah. The opiates has been renamed to opioids. They identify PCP as one of the items as well.
That's the phencyclidine.
Yeah, which, yeah.
That angel dust.
How do you know?
Wink.
He's a doctor.
Angel does sound like such
The interesting thing, for example, is we've seen cases where individuals have taken like Adderall, right? And they don't have a prescription for Adderall, right? That's an amphetamine, is it not?
correct.
And they go in and they get a drug test, like a random DOT drug test, because they're in a safety sensitive position or for whatever reason. Here they are being tested and it's showing a presence of amphetamines. And, well, where's your prescription for it? Well, I don't have one. You know, I took one to kind of keep me up or blah, 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 whatever the case may be. And so it's something as innocuous as an Adderall pill
Can trigger
can trigger a failed DOT drug test.
So backing that train up a little bit is that the DOT sphere has a body of regulations under 14 CF 49 CFR Part 40. And essentially that body regulations identifies very strict guidelines as to how a specimen, urine, or they now have oral slobs, oral
It's
swabs.
interesting because you got to be slobby to swab it.
Yeah, it's funny. Oral swab is hard to say. It wants to come out oral slob. So
It can be a slob swab.
that's what they should call it. Okay, so you got the oral swabs, and then you got breath testing for alcohol. They're very specific regulations on how the tests can be administered, how the specimen should be collected, how the specimen should be tested at the laboratory, how the results should be, identified to the specimen donor, how all of that should work together with one another. And essentially, it affords different opportunities for you to challenge the test if these regulations aren't followed to the T, because they're trying to make these tests more consistent, because there's a lot riding on it, in that if you fail a DOT drug test and you are a safety-sensitive employee in certain spheres of the DOT program, whether you're a truck driver, you're a flight attendant, and so on and so forth, there are certain consequences that come with failing a DOT drug test. So from a DOT perspective, what can happen is that if you fail a drug test, you are no longer eligible to perform safety-sensitive functions unless you are evaluated and go through what's known as the SAP program. Or be evaluated by a SAP, a substance abuse professional. So if you work in a safety-sensitive profession, you're a pilot, there are certain mechanics, there are certain flight attendants, all these individuals who come under the umbrella of Part 120, you fail a drug test, you have to go through this DOT program to become essentially returned to work in a safety-sensitive capacity.
So this is specifically on DOT drug tests?
DOT drug test. Now, let me say this much. Let's say you fail a DOT drug test. What's going to happen to you on the FAA side? Well,
Which is what we're really talking about.
yeah, we're really talking about that.
What we're really talking about is, hey, listen, I'm filling out an application, and I'm telling them that I failed a drug test. What's going to happen to me?
Sure,
I mean,
but we're going to get that. We got to lead up. We got to ease into it.
What is that?
So let's say you fail a random drug test, or a reasonable suspicion test, or after post-accident test. What's going to happen in those cases? On a DOT test, you're going to lose all your certificates. The FAA can pursue an enforcement action to revoke your certificates as a penalty to your having operated within a safety-sensitive position with presumably some sort of substance in your body. That being said,
Above the cutoff level.
above the cutoff level. You shouldn't have it below the cutoff level either, just FYI. That being said, a pre-employment drug test would not trigger revocation of all your certificates. It would trigger revocation of your medical certificate because the FAA perceives that if you've failed the drug test and you weren't performing safety-sensitive functions, but you were, going for this pre-employment drug test, it gives them enough information to say, hey, this person must be doing drugs, so maybe there's a concern relative to their eligibility to hold a medical certificate. So the only time you can really fail a DOT test, in theory, and get away from not having all your certificates revoked is in a pre-employment setting. Now, you also have refusals. That's a situation where you go in, you begin the drug test process, and you leave before the specimen has been provided. Now, it gets into the nuance of a shy bladder. What is a shy bladder? There are certain requirements that you have to fulfill in order to get the benefit of a shy bladder if you can't provide a specimen. But one thing we'll say to everybody is don't leave the drug testing site until they look you smack in the eye and say, your time is up, you can leave this facility. They have to tell you, you can leave this facility. It will not be considered a refusal because you've stayed the 3 hours for the shy bladder protocol.
You better make sure it's documented on the CCF that you stayed 3 hours. Because even if they say, hey, you can leave, and you leave, and they give you permission, they could, and it's
they still call it a refusal.
They could still call, it's a real slippery slope.
If
But
you
you know
are-
what's also
you should
interesting?
call your DER right at your company. If there's any question, should I leave or should I not? Call your DER, your designated employer representative, the people sending you for the drug test.
That's what they're there for.
Before you leave that facility. Don't leave until you've got them on the phone. And Tom, Dick, or Harry's telling you
can
can
probably
leave.
make them send you an email while you're there, documenting the call. So
Because otherwise, a refusal is equated to a positive. And even on a pre-employment drug test, a test you're going to just voluntarily because you may want a new job. If you refuse that, they'll revoke all your certificates.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
Which is interesting. Because, let's say you go in there and hey, listen, I'm going to test positive. I don't know why you're going for a pre-employment drug test if you think you're going to test positive, but let's say you are. And you go in there, you're like, man, I better, I'm going to test positive. I'm just going to leave. You'd be better off giving the sample, testing positive, and then on a pre-employment, this is only for pre-employment, so that they can then revoke your medical. Whereas if you just refuse, not only would your medical be revoked, but also your airman certificates.
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
It doesn't make any
sense.
But then you also get into adulterated specimens. You brought in synthetic urine. I don't know how you get that in there, but I've seen that happen before.
You have? You've seen
I've
it?
not seen it. I've seen a lot. That being, how they get it in, I think I do know, but I don't want to mess up our clean rating. So, all that being said, there are problems associated with DOT drug tests. And just know that there's a DOT side where you go through the SAP program, and a positive DOT drug test will also result in an action against your airman certificates, with the exception of potentially pre-employment tests. No matter the difference, though, no matter if it's a non-DOT test, right? A non-DOT test is not regulated by these regulations under Part 40. They don't have the strict requirements for how they're collected and so on and so forth. The DOT is not going to do anything against you. The FAA is not going to do anything against you as far as your airman certificates if you fail a DOT drug test, a non-DOT drug test. But what will happen, no matter what kind of drug test it is, it will potentially trigger a question as to whether or not you meet criteria for substance abuse under Part 67, the body of regulations that speak to your eligibility to hold a medical certificate. Got anything to say about that, Christopher? Or are you going to spend all this time on your phone?
Well, I'm just looking at some important emails for work. But I'll address that after the fact.
So you have a positive drug test, no matter what sphere of the world that it came from.
What did he say?
Yeah. What happens?
Well, you're going to have to put it down on your next medical application.
Where at?
18 in November.
Okay, and then what happens?
Then you're going to have to basically engage in some back and forth with the FAA regarding the facts and circumstances.
You're going to get deferred, though, right?
Well, yeah, you're going to get deferred, and then you're going to have the back and forth with the FAA where they're going to ask you for information related to the failed drug test. And
they're going to probably ask you about...
That's where you probably should have been proactive before you submitted the application to get all your ducks in a row, maybe even have an evaluation or two to send proactively along with your application, or maybe even prior to submitting your application, just to kind of get the ball rolling, right?
So what's happened? After you get deferred, they're going to send you back a letter and say, hey, what's the deal with this drug test? We want a personal statement regarding your past, present, and future plans for substance use. Now, that may be relatively innocuous. It may be pretty significant. You could end up in a spot where maybe you failed a drug test for marijuana, 10 years ago. Well, if you've listened to our previous podcast, you'll know that in theory, there's an argument to make there that because it's greater than 2 years ago, this drug test having occurred, substance abuse only has a 2-year look back per the regulation. 2 years look back to the last point of misuse. Now, they'll consider any illicit substance use, marijuana, any number of these tests that you test positive for, they'll consider that misuse of a substance, automatically be substance abuse. So
if it's within the last 2 years.
Within the last 2 years. If it's outside of 2 years, you can say, hey, listen, this is outside the scope of the regulation. If it's within 2 years, what will happen there is that they'll say, well, this is substance abuse. You need to engage with the HIMSS AME, do some random urinalysis, and have a psychiatric evaluation. Generally, that's what they ask for, and that's that. It's only substance abuse. What will happen, though? What happens in some cases, Christopher?
In some cases, all too often, more often than it should happen, is the individual will have a positive DOT drug test.
Or any other type of test.
Or alcohol test, right? And their employer will freak out. And I say, man, you got to go to rehab. You got to get involved with AA or, Narcotics Anonymous. You got to go through the full-blown HIMSS program, right? You need to go get yourself a HIMSS AME to engage in random monitoring. You need to go have a HIMSS psychiatric evaluation. You need to go have a HIMSS neuropsychological evaluation. And so you, as the dutiful employee who, feels guilty for having had a positive drug or alcohol test, whether it's right or wrong, you think, well, I gotta do everything I can to keep my career. So you start going along with what they're telling you to do. When in reality, from a medical standpoint, now that's an employment standpoint, you may have to do all that in order to keep your job, right? We don't do employment law, so we can't tell you what the obligations would be in that circumstance. But from a medical certification standpoint with the FAA, if you were talking about a first time, only time failed drug or alcohol test, and you don't have anything else on your record that you've ever had to disclose that is of the similar nature, then going through the full-blown HIMSS program would not be advisable.
That's right. Yeah, so you really need to kind of work through that. I will also say that if you're in a situation where you have a positive drug test, also got to be cognizant of what's going on in the rest of your history. If you have a series of failed drug tests, if you have positive,
you can only have 2 failed DOT drug tests before they revoke your certificates, right?
Well, before you're permanently barred from performing safety-sensitive functions under the DOT regulations.
So you can have all the certificates you want. You're not going to be using them for,
But that being said, if you have other history that could indicate that maybe you meet criteria for dependence, that's where this drug test will be the launching point for the FAA to maybe take a concern that maybe you meet criteria for dependence, which has a lifetime look back.
So here's an example. You tell me what you think they would say. You have a DUI arrest that you've disclosed, and that occurred 10 years ago, right? Now you have a positive DOT alcohol test. So on your next application, you're disclosing the previously reported no change to 18V for the DUI arrest from 10 years ago. And now for the first time, you're disclosing a failed test for 18N. Mm-hmm. Now that's an interesting question. Is it a failed drug test or is it a failed alcohol test?
Failed drug test. So technically, they would consider alcohol a drug.
Okay. So now you're disclosing this failed drug test because you're testing positive for alcohol. How are they going to look at that from a substance abuse, substance dependence standpoint? 10 years ago, you had a DUI arrest. You disclosed it on your application. They know about it. There's been no change there. Now you got a failed drug test with alcohol.
I see. Yeah.
The look in your eye of confusion.
Yeah, I wasn't really paying attention to your fact pattern. What happens here is that it's possible that could be substance dependence. The reason being is that one of the criteria for substance dependence is continued use despite damage to physical health or impairment to social, personal, or occupational functioning. So they could say, well, hey, listen, this DUI certainly impaired your personal functioning, and by nature of the fact you had to engage with the criminal justice system, blah, blah, blah. And they could say, well, you should have stopped after that. Now you have this positive alcohol test. They're going to potentially say that's substance dependence. Now, if it was a DUI for alcohol and then a positive test for marijuana, then you got the argument to say, well, hey, they were different substances. They're not going to like it, sure. But is it really meeting criteria for dependence under the regulation? I don't know about that.
So there's also the potential that if it's a one-time event here with a failed drug test, And let's just go back to alcohol because it's kind of an easy one to glom onto. And for whatever reason, however you were able to do it, you were able to operate an aircraft, or you showed up. Let's just say you showed up to work inebriated to perform safety-sensitive functions. And you get a reasonable suspicion test. And you go down and you provide your breath and you're above a 0.15. Now, are we looking at increased tolerance concerns at that point for substance dependence?
Potentially.
Or maybe even impaired control of use to the extent that you're drinking so much prior to coming to work.
That's possible.
So now you're kind of beginning to check off some of the criteria for substance dependence determination, any one of which will trigger a substance dependence determination.
That's right. So the point being here that there are many moving parts as to what a drug test could trigger as far as the FAA's inquiries. And every case is different. So you can't just say, oh, positive drug test. Well, they're all, 2-year look back. But for the most part, if you failed a drug test, outside of 2 years ago, and that's your only history, you don't use marijuana anymore. Let's say it was a marijuana test. There's a good argument there to say you don't meet criteria for abuse or dependency. You don't need monitoring. So you got to be careful not to, try and, with good intentions, go to rehab, for example, if that's not really indicated under the regulations.
Because more likely than not, once you've gone to rehab, it's going to throw up a red flag, and they're going to say, well, you wouldn't be going to rehab if you didn't have some kind of issue. And likely there's going to be some diagnosis that comes out of it, right or wrong.
Right. Now, I'm not saying don't get the help you need if you feel like you need help. But if you're doing it just to placate you think your employer, this is going to make the FAA happy, don't. There, I said it. Don't.
Wait and see.
Alice, do you have anything to add? I know you're just waiting for this.
You're covering it all so well.
Sitting over here just waiting for this to end.
Yeah.
He's we should send him out for a drug test now.
Well, after this.
All that angel dust.
Yeah. I'm off in my own little world.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go ahead and read the rest of the...
I'm going to let you close this one out.
Alrighty. Yeah, that sounds outstanding. Well, you've logged yet another...
What is wait, you're a doctor. What is...
Oh, God. Oh, God. I hate when you put me on the spot like this.
If, let's say somebody came in, they looked like they were, on drugs. What would be some signs that maybe someone looked like they were on drugs?
Erratic behavior.
Yeah.
Mania. Just absolutely
crazy.
You're describing a day in the life of Christopher Ison so far. And there's no
also
drugs
on the
involved.
other side, other than life, okay? Kind of on the other opposite end of the spectrum, just a depressed mood, just kind of staring off into space. The talk of friends when there's nobody around.
What about?
Hey, they're the best kind. Don't be. Hey, no.
What is nystagmus?
It's the kind of the beating of the eyes, kind of a wandering gaze, if you will.
Yeah. So your eyes are like jittery?
Jittery,
Yeah, but that's what they're trying to fixate on
one spot,
specified
correct.
point, and as you move that
Hey, who's the doctor here? Who's the lawyer? Shut your face.
Hey, listen, I've tried many a DUI case as a prosecutor and heard a lot about nystagmus. When it gets to like 45 degrees and you hold it, and the eyes keep bouncing off.
Yeah, kind of like a metronome. Almost kind of continuously going side to side.
That was a huge issue. You could never get... You had to... If you had a law enforcement officer who performed a horizontal gaze, nystagmus test, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. HTN, I think what they called it.
HTN.
They had to go through like training and everything in order to become an expert. You had to qualify him as an expert at trial.
Yeah, but there's so many other medical conditions that
Otherwise,
can cause that. Yeah, but I mean, if somebody's beating at 120 beats per minute while they're looking to the left, okay, yeah, there's probably a problem there. But there can be just kind of normal.
So if your employer says, "Hey, you look intoxicated,"
prove it.
Yeah. That's the point of the reasonable suspicion test.
But with the reasonable suspicion test, there has to be more, though, than just somebody saying, hey, this guy is drunk. They actually have to have a person who's designated and trained to see the signs.
Right.
In order to send you out back to this on a reasonable suspicion. So it's all regulation based. And so if that, if your coworker says, man, you drunk, you got to go take a test. Well, who are you to say that? You got to have
That's right.
the right people telling you. So that could be
It's an argument there.
Argument to
Now,
defend against.
Let me change the subject 1,000%. What's the deal with DB Cooper? Do you think he's still out there? And if he is, you know what would be really good for business is if DB Cooper outed himself on our podcast.
That'd be wild.
That happened in what? The 70s?
Yeah, we'll represent
The 60s? When did it
Maybe
happen?
it was the 60s.
I got to think the guy's dead by now. Even if he didn't die jumping out of the airplane, he's probably died of natural causes.
I am offering free representation to DB Cooper if he wants to come on the podcast.
DB, if you're hearing this, run. keep hiding.
You're probably better off.
Go deeper into the burrow that you are.
But I find the whole DB Cooper thing fascinating. How did he go undetected? They've not been able to find him. How is that possible?
Because when the parachute didn't open, he created what's now known as
Crater
DB
Lake.
Cooper Canyon.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean,
they slipped into a different time-space continuum. That's what happened.
Hey,
they
now.
didn't mark any of the bills.
What about it?
When they brought the money on for
Did they
him.
find the money?
I don't know. Did they mark?
You
they
find
should've-
it so fascinating, but you don't know some of the
They
more.
didn't find the money. They should have marked the bills. They should have marked the serial numbers.
So they could have
So
seen
they
if they
said,
were
"Oh
used
yeah,
in circulation.
yeah. Why not?"
What does this have to do with?
Well,
the
maybe
drug
let's
test?
just assume because we can make up facts about DB Cooper. I mean, was he drunk? Was he high? So that's how it connects. But let's still talk about DB Cooper. I just think it's so interesting. And like I said, without having talked to anybody, I will offer free legal services to DB Cooper if you want.
Well, you've logged yet another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer podcast. And this is just us reminding you hugs, not drugs. Okay? We are the Ison Brothers of the Ison Law Firm. See you next time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.